Shabbat Shalom and welcome to Wisdom in Torah Ministries. Thank you again for coming another week with me and study the Word, trying to understand the beautiful words of our great King. In this week, excuse me, I'm going to be covering. I'm going to continue my series on the Book of Revelation. I'm almost done. I'm covering 2 chapters today, but the way that I'm doing it, give me 1 second, guys. The way that I'm doing it, it's going to be a little different in that many of the things going on in chapter 15 to 22, the motifs are already being covered. So remember that I've been teaching it in the context of cultural backgrounds. So one of the things that I'm trying to do is try to select something within that chapter that, in order to understand and better grasp the message behind the chapter, you need to understand why that is there. And I'm doing that today. Now, this will also be part of my Leviticus study. And the reason is because the book of Revelation the setting is the temple. And also in this chapter, in chapter 15 and 16, the temple is prevalent. The plagues come out of the temple. We're going to visit that in a minute. So the question is, why is it that the whole book of Revelations, the setting of it is the temple, the altar, and it uses imagery from temple all throughout the book, but yet that's the area that we least study. Thus, we're always going to have empty places in our understanding of the book if we do not consider why it's using a language that, if you study the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, it will be a lot easier to understand. That's what I'm intending to do today. Before we start, please remember to share, like, and subscribe to this page, and also consider going to wisdomintourministries.com and subscribe to become a member. Remember, we are a donations-based ministry. Your support helps us continue the work and to travel and teach the Torah to the nations. This year, I'm going to go to Australia, God willing, Colombia, Chile, California. I'm going to be in India in December. I'm going back to Israel in November, God willing, and possibly, just possibly, Egypt in January for some study on Egyptology and the Bible. So that's something that I'm hoping it will come through. The Lord will provide for that. But all of this is for the purpose of helping us work together so that we can understand the Bible better. So keep that in prayer, guys. The Lord is good and faithful, and we know that He always answers the prayers of those whom He calls and whom He anoints to bring forth the gospel of our Messiah Yeshua. All right, so let me go to the book of Revelation, and I'm going to start right away with let me go to the verses here. I want to establish the foundation of what I'm trying to share with you today. When we go back to chapter 15, and if we've been following along, and if you need a recap, please go back to chapter 13 and 14 of the book of Revelation that I covered before. But in chapter 15, something interesting occurs. It's talking about the plagues, but then in verse, where is it? Here we go. Verse 5, it says, "And after these things I looked at the temple. The tent of the testimony was opened in heaven, and the 7 angels who had 7 plagues came out of the temple. So dressed in clean, bright linen, wearing wide golden belts around their chests. Then one of the 4 living creatures gave to the 7 angels 7 golden bowls filled with wrath." So anyway, the whole imagery develops around the temple. When we go into chapter 16, it says, "Then I heard a loud voice from the temple, declaring to the 7 angels, 'Go and pour out on the earth 7 bowls containing God's wrath.' So the first angel went and poured out his bowl on the earth. Then ugly and painful sores appeared on the people who had the mark of the beast and who worshipped his image." That is imperial cult. If we are looking at this information from the 1st century context. Now, I want to jump here to verse 6 and 7. I want you to pay attention to the way that is combining blood and then the altar. Watch this. It says, let me read verse 4 for context. "Then the 3rd angel poured out his bowl of the rivers and the spring of water, and they turned into blood. Now I heard the angel of the waters saying, 'You are just, the one who is and who was, the Holy One, because you have passed these judgments, because they poured out, watch this, because they poured out the blood of your saints and prophets. Okay, so the mark of the beast, the image, and the whatever tribulations going on, they have been killing believers. And now it says, so you have given them blood to drink. They got what they deserved. Verse 6, 7, verse 7 is the key. Then I heard the altar reply, yes, Lord God, the all powerful, your judgments are true and just. Now, the question is, why would the altar reply immediately after the blood of the innocent and the just have been poured? That's what we're going to investigate today. You see, life is in the blood. Leviticus 17:11 is clear about the function of blood, how God has set aside blood for his altar as a ransom, as life for your souls. So let me ask you a question, and please be active in the chat and let me know based on the question. Have you ever really taken a look at the role, the purpose, and the function of the altar? We do know that we understand that in the last days the altar will be restored in order for the false Messiah to be revealed and for the great tribulation to begin, according to what we understand, or the days of the end times. But every time we mention something on the temple, like for example, when I did the news about the red heifer being born in Israel 2 weeks ago, all hell breaks loose. People making some crazy statements, combining principles and concepts that they don't have no idea about the temple service. So I see that there is a lack of understanding about what these things are and how they function, what their purpose and what their role is. And I think the altar is one of them. So if we do not consider looking into what makes the altar legitimate, what is the purpose of the altar? What does the altar represent? Now, again, if you are not really looking into temple studies, the first thing you're thinking about is, oh, they're going to do sacrifices. It's about death, and that will disqualify Jesus. With all due respect to you as my audience, that shows that you have no idea what the purpose and the function of the blood, the purpose of the function of the altar is about. It's about coming near the Lord, presenting yourself before the King. So what I want to do, I want to break down in the next hour and a half what the altar is for. And it's going to be it's going to be informative. And I want to give you as much information as I can, because I really want to make sure you will get a broader perspective as I'm walking you through this, because the altar is mentioned 7 times in the book of Revelation. And if we do not look into these topics, we're not going to understand it. One of the sources that I highly recommend you get is the commentary by John Walton. This is one of 3 volumes for John Walton's incredible work on the book of Leviticus. This is my primary source for that. Among other ones, I have a whole section that is all basically on the book of Leviticus. I highly recommend you get this. I'm going to make a statement. Please don't get offended in any way. But right now we have this mindset and the notion that, no, the Spirit of God will reveal to me what that means. Stop it. That's not how it works. The Spirit of God is to set us aside, to seal us, and to lead us into the wisdom and discernment to understand the Torah. Okay, we need to learn what those things are. And sometimes it's a cop-out to just say, oh, the Spirit will reveal it to me, instead of just putting in the time to understand why these things are holy, okay? So grant me the opportunity to share with you and walk you through this, and I know you'll be blessed. So let's continue. Let's get right into the information. All right, here we go. So the altar appears 7 times in the book of Revelation. 7 times. Give me 1 second. I'm trying to get out of here now. There we go. The word altar appears 7 times in the book of Revelation, marking key moments in John's vision. So one time you have it in Revelation 6:9, Revelation 8:3, Revelation 8:5, Revelation 9:13, Revelation 11:1, Revelation 14:18, and Revelation 16:7. You would think that we take the time to understand more about the altar. Now, again, in Revelation 9:13, it talks about the golden altar of incense. Okay. So, but it's still one of the altars that was on the temple with a different function. But we're going to talk about the word altar and what they represent. In this case, I'm going to be focusing mainly on the main altar on the outer courtyard. So the central thesis here, the altar answers a fundamental question in the biblical theology. How can the presence of the Holy One remain among unclean people without consuming them? The sacrificial system and the sacrifice provided ritual means through which the covenant relationship is maintained. That's really the whole idea about the altar, to maintain relationship. Number one, cultic framework. Sinai established the altar as the center of cultic mediation between God and humanity, where in Exodus chapter 24, when the temple, when the commandments were given, the Lord says in chapter 20, latter verses, to build them an altar. And then in chapter 24, there's a ratification of that covenant given in 19 of the book of Exodus, right? Is ratified with blood, sprinkling the people and the altar. Number two, the structure of holiness. There's greater holiness. There's greater sacred space defined who may approach and under what cultic conditions. That's what we're here to really making sure that you understand. Because let me ask you all a question. Let's just say that the altar is dedicated. It takes 7-8 days to dedicate the altar. And let's just say that now we're waiting for the Messiah, for the false Messiah to appear. But how would you know if the altar that they're dedicating is a legitimate altar? Because ask yourself a question. The false Messiah cannot defile something that is already defiled. So clearly the altar will go through the steps of purification in which it will be legally binding as the throne of God on the earth, because it represents the authority of God. Now, please also remember that if you have an altar, then you have a temple. If you have buildings and you do not have an altar, it's not a temple. So what defines the temple is the altar. That's extremely important to also understand. So understanding greater holiness, different jurisdictions of who can approach particular areas of the temple service is paramount, because then you will know why and how the false Messiah, who is not going to be a son of Aaron, who will actually defile the altar. By knowing how the altar functions, then you will be aware of the end times and you know exactly when the Great Tribulation begins. Number three, let's go to number three right here. Ritual practice. Sacrifice as a prescribed rite addresses specific problems of impurity and transgression. And number four, heavenly fulfillment. Revelation shows the cosmic altar where mediation reaches its final fulfillment. Okay? All right. So the altar through scripture, we're not covering from Genesis. We are covering right here only from Sinai, okay? But there's a consistency in regards to altars. Noah comes out of the ark, there's an altar. Abraham goes into the land, there's an altar. Abraham goes to Egypt and comes back, rebuilds the altar. Jacob comes back, he builds an altar. So there are important parallels that we need to understand. So number one is Sinai. Number two is the tabernacle. Portal of mediation system, greater holiness. You have the outer court, the inner court, and the Holy of Holies. Then you have the temple. The temple is the structure that was institutionalized. Holiness is a permanent Sinai. It's a permanent meeting place with God. That's what the temple is. That's why you cannot build a temple in any other place except the place where the Lord has chosen. Number four, the book of Hebrews, heavenly reinterpretation, Yeshua as a high priest. Because without an earthly temple tabernacle, now you're going to need the case for the believers. In this case, the book of Hebrews is talking to the Hebrews in regards to how the Lord is going to forgive humanity through the work of our master Yeshua, in regards to death. And number five, revelation. Cosmic fulfillment, presence replaces the structure. After the millennial reign, the Bible does not talk anything. It doesn't mention anything in regards to the temple. After the millennial reign, the Messianic era, we know Messiah is going to be ruling. After the Messianic era, then there's going to be this the last judgment, okay, and then you're gonna have that second death, or the death defeated. Those who are righteous will reign with God, and then there's no mention of a temple after the millennial reign. And it's really easier to understand once you understand sacred space. If death is defeated, that means then that now the presence of God can dwell in the all of earth, except for a particular location where the temple was a microcosm of heaven, a microcosm of the garden, where death was absent. That's the whole idea about the rituals, to separate death and life. The temple is a realm of life. But if death is defeated, finally completely defeated, like Revelation 21:4 says, then you must consider that the earth will return to be God's sacred space. Maybe that's why the temple is not mentioned in the after the millennial reign. Something to consider, okay? All right, let's continue here. Let's talk about the fundamental legal framework. Sinai as a cosmic court, more or less, if you could use that, not only has to do with the cult, the services, but also the court case, it's a place where you go meet God, where you receive mercy and things like that. So Exodus 19:24 presents the Sinai covenant as a treaty ratification following the suzerainty pattern of the ancient Near East. He is the great God, the great king. He establishes a binding legal term with his vassal people, Israel. The altar appears immediately within this context, legal context. It is not incidental, but foundational. In other words, the moment the altar in chapter 20 of the last verses, after giving the commandment, God says, build me an altar. Then there are animals that are slaughtered. The blood means life. The blood is sprinkled on the people. The blood is sprinkled on the altar and all the vessels. So, all the people. So therefore now, and the vessels, I'm sorry, that's in the tabernacle. The blood sprinkles the people on the altar, like the book of Exodus 24 tells us. Now that's sacred space. Remember that a suzerain vassal treaty was a what do you call it? I just forgot the word now. You're taking an oath upon yourself, and if you make the oath, then you're taking a curse or a blessing. Curse or a blessing. Curse if you disobeyed, and then the intention of your disobedience is measured by the type of offering that you will bring to the altar. And if you made a transgression that was willful rebellion against God, then there was no atonement for that. I submit to you that that's what the work of Yeshua was about, to do away with the one thing the Torah and the temple could not do away with, which was death. All right, so let's talk about Sinai as the altar, as cultic space. Cultic meaning services. It says, make an altar of earth and sacrifice on it burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen in every place where it caused my name to be remembered, I will come to you and bless you. So obviously, building the altar was an ordained commandment by God. When we mention the altar today, many people object to it, thinking that that would eliminate Yeshua. So let me ask you a question. Why then was the temple functioning for 40 years after Yeshua died and resurrected? And yet no one in the New Testament had any objections with going to the temple, Acts chapter 3, verse 1, bringing a Nazarite vow, Acts 21. How come no one had a problem with going to the temple? Actually, even after the resurrection of Yeshua, 40 days after, we find ourselves in the day of Pentecost, and yet Yeshua never says, hey, don't go to the day of Pentecost. That's done away with. Don't bring the offerings that are prescribed in the book of Numbers chapter 28 and 29 in regards to the feast. Nowhere do you find that. So there's a disconnect of understanding that I'm hoping I can bring some kind of clarity. Do you see why I'm so much into the researching Leviticus? This is the reason why I'm committing myself for the next 8 years. I've been doing now a year and a half. I started a year and a half, and time goes by fast. And I'm committing myself to the rest of the decade for the book of Leviticus to connect all the dots Here we see one of them. The book of Revelation is using temple imagery, is using temple language, is using everything connected with the temple. Yet people want to talk about eschatology, but they're not looking into the elements that the book of Revelation itself is using in this vision to outline for us the end times and the coming of Messiah. It's only logical for you to study these things, and that's what we're trying to do today. So, what is the cultic significance of the altar? Let's get into more detail on this, okay? The altar is cultic, meaning that it belongs in sacred space. It's the place designated by God for cultic encounter with his people. And there the sacrifices and ritual acts are performed by which the covenant relationship is maintained and restored. This is not merely a religious feeling. It is a formal declaration of the conditions under which access to the divine presence may be granted. So God defines the terms, not humans. The altar marks the boundary of the divine presence. That's why, just like in the time of the book of Revelation, Hebrews says that the blood of Abel will cry out. And then we see in the book of Revelation, chapter 16, verse 7, that when they hear about the blood of the righteous being murdered, then the altar cries out, also singing out loud. So why? Because the altar is what makes the offering holy. It is life. That blood touching the altar not only makes your offering holy, but it's acceptable before God as life. And that's the importance of understanding what blood meant and represented, not only in the ancient world, but more importantly in the Bible. And then you will really get an understanding why the offerings were necessary. Blessing depends on proper approach to the Creator. The location is determined by the placement of the divine name. And right now we have a big confusion going around with the Melchizedek, the Sadok calendar, and the Melchizedek issue. And I would ask the question, where did God centralize his worship? Everything stems from the altar. There was never an altar in the Qumran. No one has an authority to declare anything holy from the Qumran or any other place. Once the temple was established on Mount Moriah in Har Habayit, no other place, no other altar, no other sacrifice were considered to be legal or acceptable. Okay? Anytime the tabernacle dwelt in one permanent place, no one can bring any other sacrifice anyplace else. And finally, when Solomon dedicated the altar and the temple on Mount Moriah, that is the last resting place that God has chosen forever to place his name. So all major decisions must come from Jerusalem, specifically because the altar is involved. Okay, hopefully I'll be able to explain a little bit more as we continue to move on this particular teaching. All right. All right, legal restrictions on the altar. Let's try to break these things down. What are the legal restrictions on the altar? Okay, no cut stones. But if you make me an altar of stone, you shall not build it with dressed stones, for if you use a chiseled honor, you profane it. Okay, that's not acceptable because the tools are for war. So therefore, the altar is about peace and about reconciliation. All right, no steps. You shall not go up by steps to the altar, so that your nakedness may not be exposed on it. Okay, now access to the altar is regulated even in the physical approach. And to understand it a little bit more, you have to consider the way the temples ran in Egypt, the way they dressed in Egypt, and also in the ancient Near East. Sometimes we're connected with fertility rituals. So it is important that you consider that there's a connection between what the nations did and what God wanted to do. All right, and then you have a contrast between the ancient Near East and Israel covenant biblical theology. See, in the ancient world, you have humans manufacture presents. In other words, they will build an idol. In Mesopotamia is Mispi and the Pit-Pi rituals. They will create an idol. They will animate that idol. They will give it life, and then they will place it in the most sacred place of their temple. And they believe that idol became the image of that particular God. In the Torah, it's different. They build an altar, represents God's authority, but there's no image anywhere of it. There's no image of God in there. Okay? Then you have the commandments, and it's access through obedience. There are specific laws and conditions that define how to approach God, not through a mediator of an idol. And I'm talking about something that is created that was not ordained. Okay. So in the neighboring cultures of the ancient Near East, humans fabricated divine presence through image and ritual induction ceremonies like the Mishpah rituals of washing of the mouth. Israel's system reverses this. God defines access, not humans. The altar is the legal instrument of the divine definition. By the way, you see the source here? This is a really good source. The induction of the cult image in ancient Mesopotamia. I highly recommend you get it. I have it. I've read it. It's really, really good. It will really get, if you want to understand Hebrews chapter 1, verse 3, read that book. It really give you a lot of understanding. All right. Part 2, structure of holiness, graduated sacred space. Something that Mary Douglas and also Jacob Milgram, specifically more Mary Douglas, she really focused on noticing sacred space, right? So there's greater holiness. There is Israel is holier. Even the rabbis talk about this. The land of Israel is holy. Jerusalem is holier than the land of Israel. The court of the Gentiles is holier than than the city of Jerusalem. The court of the women is holier than everything else. The court of Israel is the same. The priests, the court of Israel, the priests, and then the holy place and the holy holies. It's greater holiness. The holiness is defined as an overall separation for God's worship, but there are spaces within the graded holiness that defines who can approach God in certain areas. And the priests are the only ones who can approach God in the area of the altar. You need to really remember that, okay? Even Yeshua, pay attention to this. Even Yeshua did not have the legal jurisdiction to approach the altar on the earth. I'm going to repeat this. Yeshua, although he is Messiah, but because he is of the line of David, he did not have the legal Torah ordained authority and jurisdiction in order for him to approach the altar, to touch the altar, to even go to the holy place. He could not do that on the earth. Okay? He could only do so in the heavenly tabernacle. That's the place where the sons of Aaron do not have jurisdiction. And I mentioned this many times, but it's good to repeat it. Okay, so let's talk about the greater holiness here. The tabernacle, later the temple, was meticulously designed with a system of concentric zones, each increasing levels of holiness, right? You already know this. The outer court, you have the priestly courtyard, the holy place, then you have the Holy of Holies. You need to understand the differences. Now, the burnt offering altar, the bronze altar, was located in the outer court, accessible to the general public, meaning that they can bring offerings to the tabernacle, but even the person cannot go into the area of the altar. Only the priest can be there. In contrast, the incense altar was located in the holy place, accessible only to the priest, symbolizing prayers ascending to God. This graduated approach demonstrates that holiness is not binary, but a dynamic force that increases in intensity as one draws near. What does Jacob Milgram talk about in the commentary that I just showed you? He says holiness is not merely an attribute of God, but a dynamic force that emanates from his presence, a force that both blesses and burns, sanctifies and contaminates, depending on the state of proximity to the recipient. Okay, so there are laws that you must consider understanding in regards to the altar. So let's talk about the two altars, and I'm not really going to spend a lot of time on this because I have more information that I want to share with you. But let's talk about the Hebrew word mitzbeach. Okay, what is the root word of the Hebrew word mitzbeach? Okay, the very name of altar in Hebrew, mitzbeach, reveals its intrinsic function within Israel's cultic and ritual system. It is derived directly from the verb sabach, which means to slaughter, or to sacrifice, or to kill an animal for a meal. It's a direct function. The linguistic root establishes the altar not as a mere place of offering or prayer, but fundamentally at the site for the ritual offering of animals. So, how many of you did not know that the word altar in Hebrew had the same Hebrew root as the word that we consider to slaughter in English? See, you put altar, slaughtering, but then you pronounce the word mitzbeach, and then you say sabach, and anyone who knows Hebrews knows there's a connection based on the Hebrew root word. Okay, what is the cultic function then? The etymology of Mitzbeach shows that the altar is intrinsically linked to ritual offerings and the presentation of prescribed offerings. In other words, it has a legitimate official role and function. Consequence of sin. It implicitly highlights the seriousness of sin, which requires a costly and bloody consequence rather than a mere symbolic gesture. So even the word offering or to slaughter is connected with the altar because it has shares the same root. There are two altars. You have the bronze altar, the outer altar, and then you have the golden altar of incense in the holy place. Now, let me go here real quick. You already know this, so I'm not going to really expand too much time on this. It says the location is the outer court, immediately inside the entrance. The function of the big altar, the site for burnt offerings, sin offerings, guilt offerings, peace offerings, its primary function was atoned through fire, symbolizing complete devotion or atonement for sin. The handling of the blood is key here. This is key. Handling of blood, which represents life. The sacrificial system is not about death. It's about life. Only someone who are not really equipped to study the book of Leviticus will consider the book of Leviticus as death or the sacrificial system dealing with death. Let me repeat this again. The people who don't have a foundation on the book of Leviticus will look at the book of Leviticus and the sacrificial or offering system as death. But some of us that study a little bit and we really go to the nitty-gritty of the information, when we look at the offerings, we know the word korban means to draw near. And we know the blood represents life. So therefore, it's about life. It's about relationship. It's about worship. It's about coming to present yourself before God. So based on how you look into this, defining these terms, it lets me know if you really are a serious student of the topic, because anyone who understands the words that I'm trying to share with you today will know that Leviticus is transformed from the regular mindset of the religious system into something greater, meaning that it's God's way of saying, I want to have fellowship with you. I want to meet with you on my place of authority. If you do something wrong, still come see me. If you want to worship me because you're grateful, come see me. And the animal is a tribute to the king. It's a tribute, bringing your best to the king. Now, you're slaughtering an animal, which that in itself is death. I get it. But the moment that blood is handled by the priest and touch the altar, that's the key. When it touches the altar, now that offering becomes holy. Now that animal is no longer considered as death for the sake of life. Now meaning that you are bringing an offering to the Lord, and interchangeably now God says, you are in good standing with me. You have life. And that's the whole idea about the gospel. How through Yeshua we will have life, because it mentions his blood, and his blood represents life. It's the meaning of what blood means. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Okay? Let's continue here. There we go. Now the blood manipulation, blood, which represents life, was central in its ritual. It was applied to the horn of the altar, poured out on its base, sprinkled, serving to purify the worshiper and the altar itself. By the way, if the altar was built today and they're doing an offering, and you study the temple and the way they manipulate the blood, and I have a teaching on YouTube, by the way, about blood manipulation, okay? You can go and check it out. But if you will know, each offering was presented differently in the blood manipulation. So if I'm sitting there and watching this, and I see the way the priest is manipulating the blood, if he tosses it on the corners of the altar, or if he puts the blood on the horns of the altar, if he pours it at the base of the altar, if he goes inside the holy place to sprinkle the blood, if he goes into the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement, I would know for what type of offering that is. You would literally know what he's doing. And that's important, because maybe a lot of people are not aware of these things that are extremely important for us to know in regards to the work of Yeshua, when the Bible says that we've been sprinkled by the blood. By the way, the word sprinkled only appears in 2 books. It's interesting. Look it up. Don't believe me. Go back and look and just do a search. Sprinkled in the New Testament. You're only going to find it in 2 different books. The Book of Hebrews and 1 Peter. That's it. Okay? And 1 Peter is alluding to Exodus 24. Okay? I'm talking about sprinkle. With the word sprinkle, sprinkling, you're going to find it in 2 books. The Book of Hebrews, which is in the context of the Day of Atonement, and 1 Peter, which is alluding to writing to the diaspora and telling them to return because they have been renewed. The covenant is renewed. Remember, sprinkling of the blood. That's exactly what happened in Exodus 24. It's a covenantal restoration. And that's really the message of Peter to the diaspora in 1 Peter. He's not writing to the Gentiles. In 1 Peter, he's talking to the dispersed of Israel in Asia Minor. That's something to remember, too. When you study the cultural backgrounds, who the audience is, it makes more sense what the letter's talking about. He wasn't talking to Gentiles in that moment, because the Gentiles have never been sprinkled by the blood. Remember that when they came out of Egypt, in order for them to come out of Egypt, they have to have Passover lamb. Just keep that in mind. Okay? So sprinkling on the blood is a very important term that is only regulated for Israel. Now, that's why if we come by grace through faith, now we also become included. For Paul says, you were all under the cloud. You were all there. In other words, when they were sprinkled on Mount Sinai, if we accept the covenant with God through Yeshua Messiah, then it's as if we were there to be sprinkled with his blood, so that we are in a covenantal relationship with God. Okay? Is this making sense? All right. So now the altar of incense is a little different. It's located in the holy place. The function is for the incense morning and evening. We're not going to cover a lot on this. The handling of the blood by the priest only, was applied on the horns only once a year on Yom Kippur as part of the purification ritual of the sanctuary itself, cleansing it of the accumulated impurities of the priest. Okay. All right. So let's talk about ritual execution, sacrifice as a rite of mediation. I'm going to be doing, by the way, this is also introduction to my study in the Book of Leviticus. So I may not be covering a lot of these details of every single one of these offerings that are here right now, but I'm going to mention it and move on, because when I start doing the, once I'm done with Revelation, I'm going to start recording the videos for the Book of Leviticus, and I'm going to really get into information about each one of these. The burnt offering, which is the Olah, that's the equivalent of what Paul was trying to say, presenting yourself as a living sacrifice, okay? It symbolized the complete worshippers' total surrender and dedication to God. Now, the Mincha, which is the grain offering, is the function is a tribute of acknowledgement, an offering of loyalty, gratitude, and recognition of God's provision. Or also the poor person's offering, if you didn't have the money to bring a regular animal for the free will, for the burnt offering. Then you have the peace offering. By the way, Passover lamb falls under this category too. A cultic function is communion and fellowship, a communal meal shared with God and with other worshipers, signifying reconciliation. So Passover lamb, the Korban Pesach in the temple, was actually a communal meal. It falls in the category of a peace offering. The Passover lamb, when they would do it in the temple, it was not for salvation. It was not to remove sin. Okay? It was not to remove sin. Only God can forgive you of that sin, of the curse of death. Okay? The Passover lamb, it was a peace offering, reconciliation. It's like it says, their communal meal. Okay. Now, the sin offering, I need you to really pay attention here. Sin offering or chatat can also mean purification offering. And that throws everyone off for a loop. When you see, for example, in some of a woman who gives birth, she didn't sin. She's actually following through on her mandate to be fruitful and multiply. She's providing children. So why she has to bring a sin offering to the temple? It's actually a purification offering because she shed blood. And because blood is life, by shedding that, it's like death in a way. So in order to come into the temple again, she has to do a purification offering. She didn't sin. So therefore, it is important that you know by reading of the text that when the use of sin or some kind of transgression or a purification ritual is being addressed in the text when you read it. Many people don't know the differences. Okay. For example, the red heifer, the ashes of the red heifer, it doesn't do away sin. It's a purification offering, meaning that if you touch anything with death, you didn't mean to. It's not really a sin to touch anything with death because we live in a real world where things die. The sin will come if you do not do the ritual knowingly after you touch a dead carcass and you still enter to the temple. That's why the penalty is cut off. You will be cut off, karet. Okay, that's why it's using that term. But if you just touch something that is ritually unclean, corpse impurity, the ritual was a purification offering. There was no animal taken to the altar. There was no blood taken to the altar. There was nothing like that. It was just waters of purification. It was a ritual to purify you to go from the realm of death into the realm of life. Okay? Do me a favor, guys, if you'll be so kind and just take 1 second and go to your social media and share this link on YouTube and let them know. I think this teaching will be very important and maybe helpful to them. So consider sharing that with them, okay? I really appreciate it. Then you have the guilt offering. Now, let me go. Let me read this here. The sin and purification offering, chatat, cultic function, remedy for impurity. It addressed ritual and moral impurity, purifying the sanctuary and the worshiper from contamination. The guilt, which is asham. Asham offering is a cultic function, is preparation for transgression. It provided restitution for specific offenses, often involving monetary compensation in addition to the sacrifice. So you did something against your neighbor. So then you brought forth a compensation. By the way, Yeshua talked about this. You bring an offering, go first, say sorry to your brother, and then bring the offering. He was describing the Asham offering. Okay. Roy Gain, I was speaking with him the other day, a really nice man, and I'm honored that he's willing to share his insight as one of the leading scholars in the world in the Book of Leviticus. And we're talking about the term cut off. And we talked about this verse too. But Roy Gain's work highlights the profound cultic nature of these offerings, particularly the chatat, the sin offering, which functions as a cultic remedy for removing moral and ritual impurity, especially from the sanctuary itself. Jacob Milgrams further expands this understanding, proposing that sin is not merely a moral failing, but has a tangible, almost physical substance, chet, that contaminates sacred space. That is based on Leviticus 16, verse 14 and 16, which says that the offerings were really the offerings were really on the Day of Atonement to cleanse the temple from their sins, transgression, and iniquity. Okay, the altar through the sacrificial act absorbs and neutralizes this contaminating force, preventing God's holy presence from withdrawing. The blood plays a very important pivotal point here. For the life of the flesh is in the blood. And listen to what it says. God says this: I have given it to you on the altar to make atonement for your souls. For it is the blood by reason of the life that makes atonement. Okay, so therefore, God now assigns blood to be life for you on the altar. If it's not presented on the altar, it's not life. Remember that. So now we understand why the blood of Yeshua had to be presented in the heavenly tabernacle, because being presented in the heavenly tabernacle in the language of Yom Kippur now allows God to remove the impurity, in this case, death, from humanity, thus Yeshua becoming our mediator also. Okay? So this verse underscores the centrality of blood as a cultic instrument of atonement, representing life itself. And it's just really, out of everything that I'm saying today, an altar without the blood is just an altar. What made the altar holy was the blood when it was dedicated. Let me repeat this again. In Exodus 24, there is inauguration. Let me stop here. Moses is inaugurating the service and the temple. He becomes the inaugurator. I have a teaching on YouTube on this too, by the way, on the channel. Go back and look it up. And I'm connecting Yeshua as the inaugurator of a new covenant. He was not a priest on the earth. He did the role of the priesthood on the heavenly tabernacle, just like Moses was not a high priest, but yet he did the role of the priesthood until Aaron became a high priest, and then he never did that job again. Okay? But in the book of Numbers, Exodus chapter 24, when you read it in context, it makes sense. Let me read it to you so you see what I mean. I want you to notice something. In the dedication, ratification of the covenant, I'm going to read the whole thing because I want you to understand the whole thing, okay? It says, but to Moses, the Lord said, come up to the Lord, you and Aaron and Nadav and Abihu, the 70 elders of Israel, to worship from a distance. Moses alone came up near the Lord, but the others must not come near, nor may the people go up with him. Now, let me go up a little bit more. There we go. Right here in verse 4. After they accepted the covenant, let me read verse 3. Moses came and told the people all the Lord's words and all the decisions. So it's more than just 10 commandments and all the decisions. Okay. By the way, this is where in Judaism they say the oral law came from. It's actually using this verse as a premise for their belief. I believe that these were the commandments that you find in chapter 21, 22, and 23. Okay. The decisions based on the commandments after the 10 commandments. Now, all the people answered together, we are willing to do all the words that the Lord has said. That's a covenantal oath. And Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. Early in the morning, he built an altar at the foot of the mountain and arranged 12 standing stones according to the 12 tribes of Israel. So it's with Israel. Remember, he sent young Israelites. The priesthood was not established up to this point, so he's using the Israelites, and they offer burnt offerings and sacrifice young bulls for peace offerings to the Lord. Moses took half of the blood, put it in the bowls, plural, and half of the blood he splashed on the altar. The moment he splashed that blood on that altar, remember that one of the distinctions of God's service versus the ancient world is the fact that, give me 1 second, guys. Give me 1 second. Gracias, amor. Okay. Here we go. My wife brought me water. She's so nice to me. Okay, so I forgot what I was going to say, but it'll come back to me in a minute. So you have Moses, he grabs the blood, he sprinkles the blood on the people on the altar, right? The priesthood has not established yet. Okay, he is the inaugurator of that covenant right here. There was no sin occurring here. There was a covenant. This is what the first covenant was. Officiating with Israel. Talking about covenant, bilateral covenant. Right here. Okay. So it was ratified with blood. The people were sprinkled. That means that they're now participants of the blessing. The moment the blood touches the altar, now it makes it holy. is it brings life to the people if they obey that covenant, or judgment if they disobey the covenant. Keep that in mind. So let me keep reading here. All right, it says, and Moses, verse 6, he took half of the blood and put it in bowls, and half of the blood he splashed on the altar. He took the book of the covenant and read it out loud to the people, and they said, we are willing to do and obey all that the Lord has spoken. So Moses took the blood and splashed it on the people. Notice, he splashed it on the altar first. That sanctified the altar. And I'm going to read to you in a minute that everything that touches the altar is holy. And the blood that they're using is the same blood that touched the altar. Now he sprinkles it on the people. And then he says, this is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words. Now, it's interesting, the book of Hebrews is using the exact language for Yeshua as the inaugurator of the new covenant, in which the difference between this one and the one in the book of Hebrews is that in the book of Hebrews it's talking about perfection, meaning death will be defeated, right? Here in Mount Sinai is a bilateral vassal sovereign covenant in which the Torah can teach you to approach God, to be holy to God, but it's not removing death. Okay, that's why the renewed covenant of Yeshua, okay, does not eliminate Torah. The Torah still preserves its original function. It teaches you holiness, how to approach God, how to be blessed. All those things are still today for us to be applicable. The Torah could never remove death before, and the Torah will never in itself remove death. That's only an act of God. And that's really that without a temple, there's no atonement. Okay, so therefore now there's no atonement. By the way, and this is an important thing, although, however, the sin for Pesha, which I also have a teaching on YouTube on that topic alone, the Pesha, which is rebellion or transgression, there was no individual offering for that. Only on the Day of Atonement would the high priest bring the blood of the goat for the Lord, and there he would sprinkle the blood in the holy place, the veil, and the holy holies, the veil, and the altar of incense, and the outer altar, and God would cleanse, that would purify the temple, and then the scapegoat for Azazel would carry the iniquities and the pesha, the transgression, and the sin of Israel. Only God can pardon, but you needed both. You needed God's pardon and the blood to purify. If you really carefully read the book of Hebrews, that's the language. Yeshua is the one who bear the guilt. He bear nasa, the guilt. His blood purifies so that we can be in good standing with God. Please tell me you got that. Okay, because this is probably the most important point that I made in this whole study, in the whole study. Okay. All right, so let's move on. Stay tuned for more on this, because I'm going to be doing more teachings on this topic in the future when I get into the book of Leviticus, and I know you will understand it even more. Okay. Okay, so holiness on the altar, nature, function, and cultic function. The altar in ancient Israel was not merely a place of worship. It was a ritually defined and ontologically charged threshold between the human and the divine. Exodus 29:37. What does it say? The altar shall be most holy, and whatever touches the altar shall become holy. So why are people saying that the altar is of the devil and that the altar is an abomination when God says the altar is holy? Can you explain that to me? I mean, honestly, I would like for somebody to tell me, how is it that the temple is of the Antichrist and when supposedly he is going to defile it? Well, he cannot defile something that is already defiled. He can only defile something that is in a level of holiness. And God himself tells Moses, tell Israel, whatever touches the altar is holy. That's the only reason biblically why Israel is holy. Because the moment they were sprinkled on Mount Sinai with that blood and touched the altar, Israel became a holy nation to God. So you mess with the land, you mess with the people, you mess holy. is consecrated for God. Exodus 30, verse 29. Whenever touches them, the altar and the utensils shall become holy. It's reinforced by Leviticus chapter 6, verse 18, verse 27. Hebrews chapter 6, 11, and verse 20 talks about this, where sacrificial meat or vessels that come into contact with the holy sphere of the altar are sanctified. The verb, the kadash, is in the fall to be made holy or to consecrate. The altar functions as a generator of holiness and a transmitter of holiness. That's what Milgram's terms. He actually talks about this. It occupies a higher plane within the graduated system of holiness. The altar is the holiest thing. It represents the authority of God. The Holy of Holies is the holiest place because that's where God's presence dwells. But in regards to dealing with the people, the altar is paramount. Okay? Ontological holiness. Holiness as a real and contagious property linked to the Lord's presence. The altar transforms. Everything that touches it erases from common, chol, to holy, chodesh. Cultic holiness, consecration, introduces objects and persons into the sphere of the holy. The ritual, consecrating rituals, is what introduces the separation from the holy to the common to the holy. Okay? All right, it says, and restrict their use according to the sanctuary regulations. The altar is the mediator of God's sanctifying agency, not an independent force. All right. So what is the cultural function on the altar? Let's experiment with this a little bit. Let's read a little bit more on this stuff. The altar is the cultic center of the offering system. It's about service. It regulates purity, access, and acceptance within the sanctuary system. Atonement. Leviticus chapter 1 through 7, the altar is the site where atonement is effected through prescribed offerings. The only reason that the atonement can take place is because the priests are the only ones to be able to manipulate the blood. Purification. Leviticus chapter 4, chapter 8 and 9, the blood applied to the horns of the altar, poured out at its base, and sprinkled to purify the offer and the altar. Consecration. Leviticus 9:24, which is the chapter for the consecration of the priests. Shemini. The Torah portion of Shemini. The divine fire that consumes the offering signals acceptance and divine presence. Now, reception of offerings. Leviticus chapter 6 and 7. The altar transformed common property into holy through contact and ritual of the altar. Mediation of access. Exodus 21:14. The altar offers refuge in limited cases, but it cannot protect the premeditated murder. So it means that the altar is limited in what they can protect you from. It can restore relationship. It can purify. It can make you holy, but it cannot still do away with death. Okay? All right, function based on location. Only at the altar of the sanctuary, tabernacle or temple, by the Aaronic priesthood, Leviticus chapter 1, verse 5, chapter 7 and 9. I would add Exodus 29 too. In the place where the Lord chooses, Deuteronomy chapter 12, only in that place, the altar's function is cultural, not political. It's only legal place where the offerings can take place today would be on Hahabait, on the Temple Mount, in the location where the previous altar was. You cannot do it in any other place. So this whole theory that you can just, we just move the altar north of the Dome of the Rock. No, that's not how it works. This isn't about theories. This is about real legal things that are important for God's holiness. Okay? By the way, we have an idea where the altar may be. Joseph Good has done a good research on that. I have presented it to one of the leading rabbis in Israel, and he says it's interesting. He never considered the archaeology with it. So there's a good, educated interpretation what these things can be. Hopefully in the future, who knows? Maybe we may be in the position to be of some kind of, uh, I don't know, information we can share. I don't know. Let's pray that that would happen. Okay. Priestly authority is limited. Only the priestly line, the descendants of Aaron, may officiate. Numbers chapter 3 and chapter 18. Non-priests may bring offerings, lay hands on, but they cannot approach the altar. Okay. But only the priests handle the blood. Leviticus chapter 1, verse 5. They handle the altar fire. Leviticus chapter 6, verse 13 and 12 and 13. They handle the burning of the portions. Leviticus 3, verse 5. And they also handle the incense. Exodus 30. So therefore, when people try to tell me, though now we're in the order of Melchizedek, that doesn't line up anywhere. There's not one verse in the New Testament and the Old Testament anywhere that says that you and I are priests in the order of Melchizedek. And I can speak on this one out of confidence. There's not one verse. Not one verse that says explicitly that you are in the order of Melchizedek, that the believer is in the order of Melchizedek. Yeshua is in the heavenly tabernacle. Okay, so keep that in mind. And I know this is a point of controversy and a point of discussion in many circles, but if you do the research, don't believe me, go back and look it up. Okay, and if you find the evidence, share it with me. I'm willing to change if you share your sources and the evidence. Okay, all right. All that it touches is holy. Legal logic of the transfer of holiness. Holiness in Israelite worship functions not as a vague spiritual quality, but as a transferable legal status. The altar, as the highest ritual intensity on earth, operates as a primary mechanism to this transfer of holiness, guys. It's a status thing. Did you know that the scholars, Klawans, Milgram, Douglas, they found that there was what is called contagion. Holiness as contagious transfer of status. And when they put the oil on Aaron, and the oil and the blood and the garments, and they dedicated Aaron to that job, his son, who's a paternal line, has to be to the father's line, then he will have the same anointing. Although they didn't put oil on him. But the moment they put the garments on his father, the oil and the blood on his father, then the next priest, he's already ordained to do that job because they sprinkled the oil and the blood and it touched the altar. So their line, because it touched the altar, then they're the ones prescribed by God to approach the altar legally. And thus it is the reason why Yeshua, if he was on earth, he would not be able to do that work. Now, on the other side, the sons of Aaron are the only ones for the temple, the holy place, holy holies on the altar, but they could not officiate as kings. That was not their role. So now we have both roles. Messiah's role will be as a king on the earth. He cannot do the service on the temple. The priests cannot be kings on the earth. It's forbidden. They have different roles. They're both anointed. But remember, there was no blood touching David, okay, for his anointing. It was just to be a king. And the reason why the blood touches the sons of Aaron was sprinkled with blood, okay, because he's going to touch the altar. Okay, so now, in the heavenly tabernacle, the sons of Aaron cannot officiate. Yeshua was made a high priest in order so that he can do it. But when you come to the earth, now Yeshua is a king. He is not allowed to go into the holy place or the holy holies. How do I know? Because the Torah cannot contradict itself. And we know one of the kings of Israel tried to go in and do offerings of incense, and he was thrown out by 80 priests, and he received leprosy because he was not supposed to do that job that got anointed, dedicated, and also ratified with blood that touched the altar as holy for that prescribed job. Okay, so Klawans, Milgram, and Douglas, they say that holiness functions as a ritual energy or status force. The altar, it equals the highest ritual intensity on earth. Touching it removes something from secular use It transfers it to Lord, to God's domain. It makes it subject to the restrictions of the holy. This is not magic, it is a covenant law. The Lord designates what is His. Now you understand why the Great Tribulation will start when the altar is defiled. If the altar is dedicated to God and everything that touches that with blood, which God says, I have prescribed blood as life for you on my altar. So when the false Messiah touches and defiles the altar, they are really defiling and challenging God's authority. That's what Antiochus Epiphanes did when he defiled the altar by sacrificing a pig on it. Remember that in Israel, you don't sacrifice on the altar. That was done in pagan temples. In Israel, they offer the animal north of the altar. They place the meat on the altar in the fires of the altar, and they sprinkle the blood. But the animal itself was not slaughtered on the altar. Complete different types of rules than the ancient world will do in certain places. Hopefully that'll make sense. Okay. Are you guys getting something out of this? I know that I'm giving you as much information as I can. I think this is important. Sometimes people cater to us too much. They're not giving us the inside information that we need to understand these things. Half of the time it's just eisegesis, basically an opinion or an interpretation, instead of going to the text and trying to walk you through it. So I hope you consider joining my website for the study of Leviticus. I'm telling you, it has changed my life. It's the most rewarding thing that I've studied in a long time. I mean, I studied it before, but not the way I've been doing it lately, and it's really life-changing. Okay, what are the positive and negative consequences of the altar? The positive is consecration. The offering becomes acceptable to God. The negative is profanation. Improper touching brings guilt. Unauthorized approach brings death, by the way. Leviticus 10, the sons of Aaron, they died. Numbers chapter 16 and 17, the story of Korah, they died. And the 250 people who picked up the censer, the incense, remember? Only the sons of Aaron can bring the incense. When Moses says, pick up a censer, if they should have been more knowledgeable and said, wait a minute. Moses sanctified and ordained, dedicated, and anointed Aaron to do that work. The moment those people, the 250 people, picked up their censers, they are really committing encroaching on the holy, encroaching on the sancta, because God has preserved the sons of Aaron. They should have said, I don't think so. Go get yourself a censer. Sure, I'm going to show you that I deserve to be better than Aaron, and basically cost them death, because God ordained, dedicated, anointed Aaron, and the blood touched the altar and touched them. So whether you like it or whether I like it, whether we like it or not, God's holiness is whom He chooses on. We just deal with it. Okay? Now, what are the nuance here in the Septuagint? The Septuagint uses a particular word in Greek. It will be made holy, indicating a passive divine action. Thus, the altar is the mediator of God's sanctifying agency, not an independent force. In other words, you cannot make yourself holy on your own. The reason why we are made holy unto God as a nation is because through the blood of Yeshua, now we are made holy because that blood touched the altar in the heavenly tabernacle. Without that explanation of the book of Hebrews, you could not claim holiness. Did that make sense? Okay. The fact that the book of Peter says we've been sprinkled, that Ephesians talks about, being freed by the blood of Messiah, that there's a ransom that we've been paid for. That's why you need to understand the temple service. How can we talk about the blood of Yeshua and not understand the function and how the blood was manipulated and what it means? Let's talk about liminality and the ritual space, the altar as a threshold. Ooh, this is really important. So you have all of Israel, you have Jerusalem, you have the Temple Mount, you have the court of the Gentile, the court of Israel, the court of the women, the court of Israel, and then you have the liminal phase, the court of the priests, and then you have the holy place and the holy of holies. Only certain people can stop in that liminal zone, the priest, no one else. Let's talk about that. Let me break that down. Okay, liminality and ritual space, the altar and the threshold. Building on the ideas of Mary Douglas, Roy Gain, Victor Turner, get this book, great book, by the way, says the altar occupies a liminal zone, a threshold between human space and divine presence. That's why it's a place where God meets with you there. Okay? This makes it simultaneously a site of power, danger, and restricted access. Liminal zones. The altar occupies the threshold between human space and divine presence. That's why only certain people can go in. It's sacred space. This makes it a dangerous boundary. Power is concentrated, access is restricted, and purity is required. Liminal zones must be protected so that the divine human encounter is safe and legally valid. Now, the laws of holiness as boundary protection laws. You're going to understand what holiness is for. The laws of holiness. These include wearing the priestly garments, talking about for the priest, washing of the hands and the feet, abstaining from impurity, maintaining perpetual fire on the altar. Each rule functions as a legal safeguard that protects the integrity of the liminal zone. It also protects the priest. If they don't wash their hands and feet, they're dead. If they present the incense out of order, they dead. If they allowed a Levite or an Israelite, and worse, a Gentile, to approach the altar, the Bible says in Numbers 18 that they and the person die because it's sacred space. It belongs to God. With that being said, let me ask you a question. Now that you understand that the altar is in the area that is called the threshold, liminal zone, that only certain people can be there, those who are ordained by God to be there. Do you understand why now, when the false Messiah approaches the altar, is going to be defiled? Because he is not ordained to be there. Does that make sense now? So now I said priestly garments, ritual washing, abstaining from impurity, and perpetual fire. Those things were really what are needed to keep the liminal zone holy to God. And by the way, okay, if they did do that job, the priests bear the iniquity and they bear the guilt. They needed to protect that zone, even with their lives. If a foreigner, in this case, a czar in Hebrew, which means a stranger, an illegitimate person, it's very important, illegitimate person. You can be a Levite. You cannot approach the altar. Okay? And you can be an Israelite. You cannot approach the altar. No one. So what do we have now? We have people who they come around, they slaughter a lamb, and they put the blood on the doorpost in Passover, and they call it the Passover lamb. They want to do it like Exodus, when Deuteronomy 16 tells you cannot do that, because God already regulated and centralized what is called the service and the blood manipulation only on the altar of the Lord. We read it in Exodus 20. I forgot the chapter. Everything that the altar touches is holy. It requires the priest to do that work. In the Exodus, God ordained it to redeem them out of Egypt. In the wilderness, he establishes order to his sacred space, and he limits only the priest to handle the blood and to handle the altar. So if you are here living in the Western world and you think it's a good idea to take a lamb, slaughter it, take the blood, and sprinkle it on the doorpost, and then eat it that night and call it a Korban Pesach, you are committing ma'al. That is sin against God. That is sacrilege. That is out of order. God is, don't do that, please. Okay, please don't do that. All right. Okay, so let's continue here. We have days of purification and their legal meaning. Holiness is not instantaneous. Keep that in mind when you read this, okay? It says, it is built and stabilized ritual through repeated acts over a structured period of time. The days of purification are legal procedures that repair the relationship between worshiper, altar, sanctuary, priesthood, and God. Let me give you examples of this. There were 7 days of the dedication of the priests, Leviticus 8. They were actually at the door of the tent of meeting for 7 days. And that the moment they were eating a meal there, and after the 7 days, they are official priests to God. Then you have 7 days consecration of the altar, Exodus 29, verse 35 to 37. It took 7 days. The altar itself requires 7 days of consecration rites before it is legally operational for sacrificial service. Also, in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 43, verse 25, 26, it says the same thing. The cleansing of the sanctuary and the dedicating of the altar takes 7 days. The Nazirite vow, the structured time governs the Nazirite period of consecration and the process of restoration after impurity, a model of holiness bounded by time. That's why you have 7 days, and after the days of purification, then you go bring an offering. You find that in the book of Acts, chapter 21. It says exactly some of those words. Hey, by the way, I'm going to be in Australia. I'm going to be in Australia and at the end of July, and I'm going to be in Sydney, Brisbane, Perth. So go to my website, wisdomandtorah.com, go to the itinerary and check it out. I hope to see you guys there. Okay? I appreciate you guys being here today, by the way. Thank you so much. I really do pray this is a blessing to you. Let's continue. Day of Atonement. Day of Atonement is an annual reset of the entire sanctuary. The altar, the holy place, and the most holy place are purified from the accumulated impurity. So it takes time in order for these things to occur. Let's move on here. All right, so how about the holiness rules? What can and cannot do? What can and cannot touch the altar? Let's talk about this. The holiness of the altar is protected by a precise legal code that regulates what can and cannot come into contact with it. It's important that you remember this. These rules are not arbitrary. They reflect the ontological reality of the greater sacred space and the legal consequences of contact with that. It's based on Numbers 18. What can touch the altar? Blood from the offerings, portions of the offerings, the priests in authorized service, not just anybody, because if they are if they touch impurity, any kind of impurity, they cannot approach the altar themselves. Sacred objects, utensils, and vessels. The Levites cannot touch the utensils and the vessels, only the priests. Incense, only the priests. Fire from the Lord. They're the ones that only can deal with the fire on the altar. It says, what cannot touch the altar? Profane hands. That's why they wash their hands and feet. Unfit animals. Unauthorized incense. Any person in a state of impurity. Unauthorized priest or lay person. Cut stones or human craftsmanship. Effect of contact. Elevation to a state of holiness. Restrictions on use and consummation. Legal responsibility if used improperly. Incorporation into the Lord's domain. Give me a second. All right. It says incorporation into the Lord's domain. And lastly, death by unauthorized approach. Leviticus 10 and Leviticus 16 and 17. All right, so let's talk about this. Altar function and priestly function. Are you guys getting something out of this? Is this making sense to you? All right. Within the sanctuary system, two complementary and interdependent spheres of sanctuary operated simultaneously. Okay, let's talk about that. The altar function, based on place, center of the object, the altar defines the cultic status of the objects offered upon it. Before contact, animals is common property. After the ritual, the animal or portion is holy. Sometimes most holy. Okay? Now, the priestly function, based on the person, centered on the function. The priesthood guards who may approach the altar, how the rites are carried out, how impurity is diagnosed, and who bears responsibility if something goes wrong. That's why they determine the holy things, not us. So think in terms of mutual dependence, but asymmetric roles. The altar cannot act without the priest, and the priest cannot carry out their vocation without the altar. That's a fact. So the altar functions and it covers in what happens to things when they enter into a sacred space: offerings, blood, vessels, and certain people in ritual posture. It sanctifies, absorbs impurity, it mediates atonement. It always within the norms of the Torah. Now, the priestly function covers who officiates, who may approach, how rites are performed precisely, how purity is diagnosed, and how the Torah is administered. Priests are guardians of access, the interpreters of the law, diagnostic of purity, and bears responsibility of the temple. Now, how about the cultic functions on the altar? Atonement, status, and asylum. This is quite interesting, by the way. The last one here was actually limited once the temple was centralized. At one point, someone was allowed to touch the horns of the altar, but then that was removed because of we're talking about holiness and taking Numbers 18 in consideration. But atonement, we're going to define these terms, by the way. It's important that we do. And that's what's going to take me the rest of my time, is defining what atonement is. But Leviticus 17:11, which is really the core of what I'm trying to convey to you, okay? It says, it is the blood that makes atonement for life. The blood sprinkled or poured on and around the altar performs a kippur, which is like atonement or atonement or ransom for you. You know, so in the sense of the cult, the service, sin or impurity are dealt with in this specific place through regulated actions. The altar is the unique site where atonement and reconciliation are effected critically and culturally. You cannot do it any other place. Now, the beauty of the altar is that it transforms the status. Like I said before contact, the animal is common property. After is holy. Okay, I think you already have that. I don't have to repeat that anymore. Okay, let me move on from here. These are examples of why you should not approach the altar or you should not do anything out of order. The first one, Nadav and Abihu, is basically the sons of Aaron bringing strange fire. They were anointed, they were dedicated, and they were sprinkled with blood and the oil to do this particular work of priests. But when they presented the wrong thing at the wrong time, they died. Now, King Uzziah, in the temple, 2 Chronicles chapter 26, verse 16 to 21, he attempts to burn incense on the altar, and the priest kicked him out. He was struck with leprosy. See, the king's political authority cannot override the priestly function on the altar. Okay? Just like the priest cannot override the kingly role of the king. Now, Jeroboam's altar, remember, this was the ultimate abomination. Jeroboam, he built two temples, one in Bethel, the other one in Tel Dan. If you go with me in November of my tour, I will take you to the one in Tel Dan. And they changed the feast from the 7th to the 8th month. They changed the priesthood, and those people would approach the altar and manipulate the blood. They were not ordained to do that. It was not a legitimate one. It was not legal. It was actually an abomination, which is the cause as to why Israel, the 10 tribes of Israel, went into the exile and failed to return. Okay, completely, all of them. Now, Hanukkah is the dedication of the altar, by the way. That's why it takes 8 days. You have 9 lights on the on the Hanukkah, because one of them is the one that lights the others. It's 8 days because they celebrate Hanukkah with the same joy as the days of Sukkot. But remember, they were dedicating the altar, and the altar takes 7 days. On the 8th day is an altar to God. So if you follow the story, you will see it and you know how that works. Okay, then you know that Hanukkah is about the dedication of the altar. Why people find fault with it, I don't understand. I really don't get it. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about terms. And this is going to be the core of my teaching today. It's going to be more academic. I want you to pay attention to the sources that I'm putting at the bottom here. Okay. I'm going to quote those sources here. And I'm going to define for you, I don't know if anyone ever does and ever had, but I would like to have the opportunity to define these terms. Purity and clean, impurity, holiness, guilt, to approach, very important word, by the way, karav, and the other one is kipel. So, and then you have chatat. So these are 7 terms that I want to define for you. And the following terms constitute the central vocabulary of Israel's sacrificial and purity system. When I learn these terms and how they function, then I'm able to understand much better the Book of Leviticus. Each one is analyzed using the standard lexicographic tools. 1, Halot, Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament. Tidot, Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament. DCH, Dictionary of Classical Hebrew. And then Nidot, which New International Dictionary of the Old Testament Theology and Exegesis. So I'm going to give you the definitions of these words. By the way, do not use the Strong's Concordance for this. The Strong's Concordance is not going to give you all these definitions. It's not designed to. The Strong's Concordance is an index for the King James Bible. That's it. So if you want to know more about the Hebrew words, consider the ones that I just mentioned. They're going to go deeper into the meaning of these words, using Engineerese, Akkadian, all the languages to complement it, to give you a better background and understanding. So I want you to give me at least the rest of my time, because if we understand these terms, I found there are others that I'm going to cover in the future. But if we understand these terms, then the service will make more sense. Even the way you use the word holy, you will understand it better. Okay? Because we're going to cover this in a minute. So the 7 terms form an interconnected legal and theological vocabulary. Okay? No term can be understood in isolation, and that's the problem. Many people do their own interpretation of one term, and they make it as a global. Example is holiness. Guys, the holiness that a high priest has is greater than the holiness of a regular priest. The holiness of a regular priest is greater than a Levite. The holiness of the Levite is greater than a male of Israel and a woman. The holiness of a woman or a man of Israel is greater than any holiness anybody else, because the Gentiles are not holy to God. They may be holy to another God, according to their religion, but they're not dedicated to God. That's what the word means. So when people say, well, we are a nation of priests, we are a holy nation, we are a royal priesthood. Well, yeah, we're a holy nation, but our holiness is greater holiness. It's not at the level of holiness of a high priest or of a priest, because we don't have the authority to function in the temple proper. Hopefully that'll make sense. Please do me a favor. If you're here and you heard just this, tell me that you understood that, because that's really what I'm trying to get to, understanding the altar and the words that defines holiness, and how we can grasp how important the altar is and why the book of Revelation is using it 6 times out of 7 in regards to the greater altar and the importance of blood on it. Okay? You're not very active on the chat, but that's okay. All right, guys. I hope you enjoy. Listen, I love the word, man. I've learned so much the last few years. And right now, I'm honored to have the privilege to have some really good people helping me out. Joseph Good, as you know, he's been my temple teacher for a long time. And I made friends with some really amazing people who are scholars, humble people, nice guys that I'm doing podcasts with. And I'm telling you, they're challenging me to look at other areas. And I'm challenging them to connect more of the Torah stuff, not in a bad way, it's just in conversation. And keep me in your prayers because it's a really cool experience that I'm going through right now uh, that I'm like really excited about because I'm understanding my faith better. I'm understanding how I can come near the Lord, how I can approach God the proper way, and how I understand these terms is allowing me that when I read something, I'm going, oh, okay, I understand what that means. So I'm not taking certain things out of context. And that happens to us many times without the proper understanding of terms and language of the Bible. So let's go right into here. Let us start with the word purity. I'm sorry, holiness. Okay. I'm going to give you the whole rundown. Lexical data, theological meaning. I'm going to give you from all the sources that I quoted. Okay. I don't know if anyone's done this for you, but we are going to do it right now because I think it's important. By the way, you can find these on your own. You don't believe me? You go back and look it up in the sources. You find them there. You find them. It's not a secret. Okay. Let's talk about the word holy. Now let's read from the Halot. If you want the best source in the Hebrew, this is the best one. A primary meaning means separation, setting apart. The root chodesh denotes that which is withdrawn from common use and reserved for the divine sphere. It appears 830 times in the Old Testament. Okay, you have the noun chodesh, kadosh, an adjective, holy, and they have different, or to sanctify, or to be made holy. So you have different types of uses, but they all represent the same thing, separated for a divine sphere, a particular use. Everything has its place. Now, the theological dictionary of the Old Testament says the root expresses the fundamental distinction between divine and human spheres. Holiness is not primarily an ethical category, but an ontological one. It describes God's nature and what belongs to him. So that means that if God says, this is holy, let me ask you all a question. If understanding the term here, if God says, this is holy to me, and you change it, what are you doing then? Are you challenging God's authority of what he declares holy? Does he have a legal right to take issue with you for changing his holy things? I want you to think about that, and I will remind you, the land is holy. The people are holy. The priesthood is holy. The offerings are holy. The high priest is holy to God. You want to continue to fight. The temple is holy to the Lord. You want to continue to fight those things. The calendar was determined by the priest in the temple and included the altar. Everything that is holy. You change the calendar, you are changing holy things. The feasts are holy to God. At its appointed season, they are holy to the Lord. You and I don't have the chance to, the right to change it. I don't care who you are. If you change them, you are committing sacrilege. Our loyalty is to God and his holy thing. He determines who is holy. We don't. We don't change God's appointed times. Okay, let's continue here. All right, so let's continue. The DCH says distinguishes holy as a state, being holy, a place, the sanctuary, and a class of objects, holy things. The altar is holy, most holy, superlative degree. Okay, it means greater degree, just like the Holy of Holies. Now, the New International Dictionary, it says, highlights the contagious nature of holiness. Contact with what is holy transfers holy status, like Exodus 29:37 and also Leviticus 6:18. This is the legal mechanism of the altar's sanctifying function. Now, let's talk about the theological and legal meaning. Key text here is Exodus 29:37. The altar shall be most holy, right? Whatever touches them shall be holy. And then it says in Leviticus 19, you shall be holy, for I am the Lord your God, I'm holy. So the terms operate on three levels. One, divine holiness, God's essential nature. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. Two, derived holiness, objects, places, and people set apart for God. The altar, the priesthood, and the sanctuary. Remember the king of Babylon when he decided to drink from one of the holy vessels of the temple? He got very arrogant and he began to drink wine from one of the vessels that were in the temple, for God's service. And he decided to do that. And didn't he die that night? Now, the third part is contagious holiness, the transfer of holy status through contact with the altar and sacred objects. The legal implication, the designation of the altar as most holy places it at the summit of holiness gradient. Contact with it is juridically transformative. It removes objects from the common sphere and it places them under divine jurisdiction. By the way, if you tell me you're holy unto the Lord and then you're eating a ham sandwich, you are profaning something holy. Because if you say you're a temple to God and you're eating pork and you're eating shellfish and you're eating what God says not to eat, then you are profaning the temple. Not a popular message, but it needs to be said. By the way, I'm not judging people. I want you to become aware of this. We're not judging people. We're talking about systems of religion. I know many Jewish people in Israel. They're amazing people. I know many Christians that are incredible people too. We know many people in the Messianic and Hebrew roots, good people, but we're still trying to learn. We are still trying to become aware how to approach God in a manner that is conducive of reverence and respect and honor to the great King. We are all in this journey, okay? So when I mention certain things, I'm not pointing the finger or trying to judge you. It's just making a contrast. If we say we are something and we believe we are that, but then we are doing something that God in his Bible says that is defilement, then it's a reality that if we call ourselves a temple to God and we are eating the unclean, the defiled, and the things that God abhors, then we are not serving as a good temple to the Lord. We are profaning his temple. So therefore, understand that this language that I'm trying to convey is not pointed out as judgment. It's just that we're using terms like holiness, but we're not understanding it fully. And then we're mixing it with practices that the term that you're using, the Jew will hear you say it and they'll see you eat something unclean. And they go like, he is not a temple of God. He doesn't belong to the kingdom because he is not reflecting what God said to eat for the house. Hopefully that'll make sense to you. Okay. Are you with me? Are you tracking? Let's go to the next term. We got 6 more to go. Oh my Lord, I got to hurry up. Let's talk about 2 of them here. Impurity and purity. We need to talk about this. Impurity and purity. Tameh and taher. Okay, let me go here. Tahor. Let's talk about impurity first. Ehalot. The verb means to be and become impure. The adjective, tameh, describes a state of ritual impurity that disqualifies a person or object, from participating in worship. It appears 280 times in the Old Testament, concentrated in Leviticus and Numbers. That, the tidot, impurity is not primarily moral, but ritual, a state of incompatibility with the holy. Like that's what I was just saying. If you're holy and you're eating something God says is an abomination, it's incomparable. You cannot call yourself holy if you're eating what God calls an abomination. Keep that in mind, okay? You are ritually unclean unless you do it willfully. That changes the intent. That changes the game. All right? Now, a state of incompatibility with the holy sources include contact with corpses, skin disease, bodily discharges, under contact with unclean animals. Impurity is contagious and transferable. That's why if you touch something dead, or if you went to a house that someone died, or you sat where someone died there, then you are ritually unclean. Okay, so impurity, that in this case is ritual. Okay, now adultery is a major impurity, but is willful. So therefore, the intent is different, so the penalty is different. Okay, there's death on that one because it's premeditated. New International Dictionary of the Old Testament distinguishes 3 degrees of impurity. Number 1, severe, requires sacrifice for purification. 2, moderate, requires washing and waiting until evening. Like the example of the red heifer, the priest who sprinkles you becomes unclean until evening. But he didn't sin, he didn't do anything wrong. It doesn't require sacrifice for him. And number 3, mild, resolved by washing alone, like a male with a discharge. He just washes and that's it. Each degree determines the degree of exclusion from the altar. About the level implication, an impure person cannot approach the altar. The priest couldn't. Okay, approaching without authorization while impure constitutes a violation of the altar's holiness and incurs karet. By the way, I'm doing a in-depth teaching on this word. I'm presenting it in Spanish immediately after this. When I'm done here, I'm going to present it, and then I'm going to record it later, maybe next week, for my website in English. So stay tuned for this because this is important. Okay. Now let's talk about purity. The halot says the verb means to be or become clean or pure. The adjective tahor describes the state of ritual fitness for participating in worship. It appears 200 times in the Old Testament. Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament says purity is the positive counterpart of impurity, the state of a compatibility with the holy. It is not merely the absence of impurity, but a positive qualification for access to the divine presence. You see the importance of purity if you are holy to God. So being holy to the Lord is not efficient. It's not sufficient. Let me repeat this again. I don't know if you ever consider this. Being holy to God is not enough in order for you to approach God. That's why the Torah, God makes you holy, sprinkled you with the blood, symbolically in Exodus 24. Now you become holy to God. Now he gives you the instructions of the Torah in order for you to learn exactly what is permissible, what is not, what you should do or you should not do, what commandments can bring you closer to the Lord, what are the ones that create a separation from food to sex to worship to everything. So being holy is not enough. Your job is responsibility for purity, maintaining yourself in the state of moral purity, because right now every single one of us are ritually unclean. It is an impossibility right now for you and I to be ritually cleansed, but it is more so important that it is our duty to be morally clean, right now. Everyone can be morally clean, but everyone cannot be ritually cleansed today. If the temple is restored or the altar restored and the worship is restored, when you go up to Jerusalem, then you can become ritually pure to enter the temple. Outside of the temple, you must stay morally pure. That's why, the woman in her menstrual cycle, she's unclean for 7 days. If she's going to the temple, you got to be washed to go up, purification offering. But outside of the temple, you cannot have sex with your husband for 7 days until you cleanse. If there's a continual flow, you got to wait certain more days. Does that make sense? So one is morally, the sexual act with your husband under that state of impurity, and the other one's for the temple. If you're going to go to the temple, then you wash and bring a purification offering because of the blood. Hopefully that'll make sense. All right, the DCH. The pure form of the word means to purify, an active process of restoring the state of purity. This is the function of the purification rites prescribed in Leviticus 12 to 15. To purify, that's the whole intent. What are the legal implications in regards to this? Purity. Legal implication. Only the clean, the pure may approach the altar. The priest's role as purity diagnosticians is the legal function to access control that determines who may access the altar's sanctifying power. What it means here is an Israelite could not go directly to the altar and touch it, but you can go to certain areas, right, in the court of Israel or in certain areas surrounding the area of the priest. But you have to be ritually cleansed. You got to be purified in order to approach God. You're already holy, but now you need to be purified. Have you noticed that there's a distinction? By the way, thank you guys for your donations that you give in here. I really appreciate it. All right, so let's continue to the next word. One of the most underrated, less really researched word is called kippur, which is expiation or atonement at one meant. Lexical data. The halot, the pure form of kippur, is the standard term for expiatory act performed at the altar. Three etymologies have been proposed. One, from kofel, or kapar, from the Arabic kafara, to cover. Number two, and by the way, I follow this one here. This one right here, in my opinion, scholars pretty much right now are on this one. Kofel, which is the same root, by the way, when it says ransom, in the Hebrew, the word ransom has the same root word, the same letters as kippur. Okay, the most widely accepted among scholars right now is ransom. Remember what Yeshua says? I did not come to be served, I came to serve and be a ransom for many. And number three, a kupuru, which is to clean or remove, Akkadian word. Now the halot favors the sense of ransom, cleansing. It appears 100 times in Pio and in the Old Testament, almost exclusively in cultic context. And it's interesting that in the New Testament, in the book of Hebrews, is using the Greek word that conveys a ransom for a slave. It's the same language. So something for you to think about. Now the Tidot commentary, theological dictionary, the kippur and the pio is a cultic technical term. It carried out by the priest, subject, right, at the altar, the place, through the manipulation of blood, means on behalf of the offerer, the beneficiary. The result, let me make it bigger for you guys. The result of is that sin or impurity are covered or cleansed, and the offer is restored to a covenantal state. You may be holy, but you may have messed up. You need to be consecrated. So being holy is not enough. You follow what I'm saying? Okay, so the DCH dictionary, it knows that kippur takes a variety of objects. It can atone for a person, the altar, sanctuary, the land. This scope shows now expiation is not merely personal but systemic. It repairs the whole covenant relationship. The New International Dictionary of the Old Testament argues that kippur is best understood as ransom. By the way, guys, this is important that you really understand right now. The statement I'm making right now is really important. I was speaking with Professor Gain the other day, and I've asked him about the academic consensus that there are actually many are leaning towards ransom, and that actually explains the book of Hebrews better and the work of Yeshua through his blood. It says the substitution is one life for another. The blood of the animal represents the life, Leviticus 17:11, offered in place of the life of the offerer. Okay, so the altar is like the legal site where this substitution is formally carried out. In other words, you don't accept human life or human blood, so you accept the animal instead. By laying the hand on it, you're pointing to the priest that that animal is yours. Okay, and the blood of that animal, when it gets to the altar, is now holy. Thus, your offering has been accepted. So the theological means and legal meaning, we know that from Leviticus 1:4, it shall be accepted on your behalf for expiation, kippur for you, right? Legal logic of kippur. Sin or impurity creates a legal deficit in the covenant relationship. The offerer brings an animal as a substitute. Okay, in this case, for certain offerings. The priest performs the manipulation of blood at the altar. The legal deficit is resolved. The offer is restored to the covenant state. When it says a substitute, saying bring in a tribute to God, bring in the tribute so that God may accept it, and the blood becomes life for your soul. Okay, and lastly, the altar absorbs impurity and must be purified, specifically on the Day of Atonement. So the altar is the indispensable legal instrument of atonement. Without the altar, expiation cannot be carried out at all. And that's exactly what the book of Hebrews says. If we go to Hebrews, I'm almost done because I have to go. Hebrews chapter 9. Hebrews chapter 9. It talks about blood, how we'll be purified. See in verse 22, watch. And then in verse 20 to 22, listen to what it says. It's actually alluding to Exodus 24, by the way. It says, actually, let me read from verse 18. So even the first covenant was inaugurated with blood. For when Moses had spoken every command to all people according to the law, he took the blood of calves and goats with water and scarlet wool and hyssop and sprinkled both the book and itself on all the people, and said, this is the blood of the covenant that God has commanded you to keep. Remember, in Exodus 24, there was an altar. Indeed, according to the law, almost everything is purified with blood. And without the shedding of the blood, there is no forgiveness. There's no remission. There's no release. There's no jubilee. There's no atonement, guys. The language is consistent all the time, but we need to understand the terms to grasp it. Give me 5 more minutes. I have a few more definitions. I want to finish them up. To draw near. Let me see how many more I have. 3 more. Yeah, that's it. 3 more. I could do it. This one is important. To draw near. Karav. Now, the lexical data. The verb karav means to come near, to approach. In cultic context, it is the standard term for approaching the altar or divine presence. The hipil form of hikriv means to cause to draw near. That's where the word korban comes from, by the way. The noun korban, offering, that which comes near, derives from this root, that it appears 80 times in Leviticus and Numbers. So when you think about the book of Leviticus, you should never think about death. It's the opposite. To come near God, to approach Him. Now the tidot, the karav in cultic context, make this a little bigger for you guys. Okay, in cultic context expresses the fundamental act of worship, the movement of the worshiper towards divine presence. It is a legally regulated act. Keep that in mind. To approach God is a legally regulated act. That's why it requires the altar to be holy and the blood to be used for life for your souls and the priest to mediate it. No one else. When you read Hebrews, keep that in mind. Okay? It says not everyone can draw near, not in any way. The verb of to draw near encodes the entire legal framework of access to the altar. Okay? Now, Nidot, New International Dictionary, says the noun korban is significant. It defines the offering not by its material content, but by its regulation function. It is that which comes near to God. The altar is the place where this drawing near takes place legally. Okay? So let's go for the next word. Karav and theological legal significance. The logic. Let's go to the logic. 1, approaching the altar is a legal regulated act, not a spontaneous movement. Anytime anyone who approaches the altar without having the authority dies, according to Numbers 18, verse 1 through 5. Go back and read that. The verb encodes the entire access framework. Who may draw near, what may be brought, and how it must be presented. 3, unauthorized approach. In other words, approaching God without authority, without authorization, is illegitimate and is death. It's a capital punishment. You are cut off. The noun korban defines the offering by its regulation function. It is that which comes near, the legal instrument of approach. The altar is the endpoint of drawing near to God, the place where the approach is completed legally and the offering is accepted or rejected. Lastly, we have a sham. I have two, chatat and a sham. A sham, in this case, is trespass or a guilt offering. Okay? The noun, asham, has two main sense. One, the state of guilt incurred by specific violation. And two, the reparation offering, guilt offering, prescribed to address that guilt. The verb asham means to incur guilt, to be guilty, and it occurs 72 times in the Old Testament. Now, let me ask you a question. Remember when someone came to Yeshua and he says, go first, ask for forgiveness for your brother, and then bring an offering? Do you remember? Do you guys remember that? If you understand the temple service, you know he's talking about the asham offering, because that actually comes with a reparation. You got to pay 20%, a percentage, if you did something against your brother. That's really the whole message behind what Yeshua was saying. Okay? The asham offering is distinct from the chatat, purification offering, while the chatat addresses involuntary sins and impurity. The trespass, in this case, the guilt offering, addresses specific violations involving sacred property and interpersonal wrongs with sacred dimensions. See, it includes financial component, restitution plus 1/5, 20%. Let me go to the other one so we can, theological and legal meaning. I want to go to the legal stuff here. Legal categories addressed by asham. Misuse of sacred property. You have to bring that offering. Inadvertent use of holy things. Violation of divine prohibitions, even without awareness of it. False oath and interpersonal wrongs. Wrongs against the people that also violated the covenant with God. And a Nazarite vow contamination. Oh, Lord. When Paul did a Nazarite vow and he cut his hair in Sencria, he needed to bring this type of offering. Did you know that? When you read in the book of Acts, chapter 18, and says that Paul made a vow, but he cut his hair, not his head, his hair, and he goes to Jerusalem to start the vow again. He had to bring a Nazarite, he had to bring an asham. So the asham offering is presented at the altar, where the priest performs a atonement or kippur on behalf of the offerer. The altar is the legal place where guilt is formally discharged. And lastly, let's stop here with the last one. Only have time for this one. Chatat, which is sin. And this makes a lot of people stumble, because you see a sin offering and immediately you think you did something wrong automatically. But the sin offering, as we go into outline for you here in the definitions, will give you a little bit more clarity. So let's look at the lexical data here. The halot, the noun chatat, derives from the verb chata, which to miss, sin, do wrong. The noun has two main senses. One, sin or fault. And number two, the purification offering prescribed to deal with that sin. It appears about 293 times in the Old Testament, with the sacrificial sense, concentrated in Leviticus 4 and 5, chapter 6, verse 24 to verse 30, and chapter 8 and 9 and 16. Now, Theological Dictionary says, Milgram's decisive analysis follow the Tidot. It argues that chatat is best translated, pay attention to this, Milgram as well as this dictionary, they translate is best known as a purification offering rather than sin offering. The offering does not primarily address the moral guilt of the offerer, but purifies the sanctuary from the impurity generated by the offerer's sin. I agree with Milgram 100% on this. Okay. The blood is applied to the altar or to the inner sanctuary on Yom Kippur. So the inner sanctuary on Yom Kippur, Leviticus 16, to cleanse it from the accumulated impurity. The Bible says that in Leviticus 16, verse 14 and 16, and also verse 30 to 33. Okay. So, and the DCH dictionary says distinguishes between sin as a moral category and as a cultic category, the offering. Let me go here to the Nidot, the New International Dictionary of the Old Testament. The Chatat is graded according to the status of the offer. One, the anointed priest, he brings a bull. Leviticus 4:3. The whole congregation, a bull. It's a communal. Okay, they could afford it. Leviticus 4:13. And number 3, a leader, a male goat. Leviticus 4:22. And a regular person bring a female goat or a ewe lamb. The higher the status, the higher the holiness, the more serious the impact of the sin on the sanctuary, and the more elaborate the purification ritual. Hopefully that'll make sense to you. So what are the legal logic to the chatat? It's for inadvertent sin or impurity creates a legal deficit. It contaminates the sanctuary even without the offerer's awareness. So you do something wrong in the temple period, it will contaminate the temple even by your action without even you knowing it. That's why you have Yom Kippur for ignorant sins. Remember? Chatat offering, the Day of Atonement covered all of them. Avon Pesha Chatat, okay? The Chatat offering is brought to the altar where the priest applies the blood to the horn of the altar or to the inner sanctuary. The application of blood purifies the altar sanctuary from accumulated impurity. Now, the priest performs atonement on behalf of the offerer, restoring covenantal status. And lastly, the altar is both the instrument of purification and the object that is purified. It absorbs impurity throughout the year, and it requires its own annual cleansing on the Day of Atonement. When you study this on the Book of Leviticus, it's astounding how much we don't know. It's exciting, actually. We get to learn every day. So the Chatat is the most altar-centered of all sacrificial category. Its blood is applied directly on the altar, and its purpose is to maintain the legal integrity of the sanctuary system. So it has a big responsibility to do all this stuff. So the interconnected lexical field, you have the 7 terms: approach, holiness, impurity, purity, and then purification, and also kippur and asham. All of these go together. Okay? This is the legal aspect of the altar that we must learn to understand exactly the purpose, the function, and the role of Messiah as the atonement that was done once and for all to eliminate death. Yeshua's work of redemption has nothing to do with this. This was to show us what was be pointing to the Messiah. Okay, there's sin. There's how did God maintain relationship through the temple service? There was willful sin, death. There was involuntary sin. There was a willful, but then you repented, you realize you did wrong, you can still approach God. The whole community sins, it defiles sacred space. In other words, your actions bring consequences. That's what the temple was defined, trying to define for you what allows God to still have fellowship with you, what you needed to do to maintain relationship of a covenantal order. Now, Yeshua's work is a symbolism of type of the lamb, who is a peace offering, a type of a red heifer, which is not an offering in the temple, is a slaughtering outside the camp for purification for corpse impurity. That's completely different. A type of a Yom HaKippurim, the goats, is a typology, okay? It would illuminate the text. You look at it, you go like, oh, I see, I understand what it means. So therefore, now Yeshua's work goes beyond all these things. His blood serves as life. It's not human blood in the heavenly tabernacle. Okay, it's not considered as an abomination because only on the earth the human blood cannot be placed on the altar. but God already prescribed blood as life for your souls. In the book of Genesis, remember when Noah came out of the altar, do not shed the blood. It's life. Don't eat it. Don't do anything with it. And then God reiterates this in the book of Leviticus. So then when you go into the temple, the heavenly tabernacle, which the animal sacrifice cannot be put on the altar, because the animal sacrifices on the altar cannot remove death. It can only purify sacred space, but it cannot fully remove the curse of the earth and the curse of the people, which is in this case is death. The curse of the law is death. It's not the law. So therefore, the book of Hebrews is giving you an incredible thesis, illuminating through the language of the temple and the language of Yom Kippur and the language of the Jubilee and the language of Isaiah and the language of Exodus 24 to let us know how God in his mercy has given you his righteousness, has appointed a high priest who can intercede on your behalf for the one thing that the earthly tabernacle could not do for you, eliminating death, the ultimate type of impurity, that the temple can purify you to temporarily enter, but then eventually you will die. But in this case, God, through his son Yeshua, establishes the legal framework in which now legally we are now being sprinkled, included in the holy community, so that we can approach God. And then if we die, we have received the blessing and the promise that we will be resurrected, because that death, a second death, has been completely annihilated, destroyed, devoured, exactly like Isaiah chapter 25, verse 7 and 8 says, and exactly like Paul reiterates in 1 Corinthians 15, and just like is mentioned by John in Revelation 21, verse 4. And this is why the temple imagery and the altar is so important to understand. If you want to understand the book of Revelation, study the temple, study Leviticus. It will change your life. Shavua Tov. I'm not going to see you until after Shabbat. So have a great week. May the Lord bless you and keep you. Remember, share, subscribe, and like, and let others know about this teaching. Subscribe to wisdomandtorah.com. And if you want to really learn in the land, come with me to Jerusalem in November, to Israel in November. It will be life-changing. I will show you the land of my king. I will show you how beautiful, how just, how righteous is the King of the universe, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.